can do it for you. Great. How's it look at coffee station? Colleagues, good morning. Thank you. So we're going to begin the session, and of course we hope a few more people will come in and fill the room. Thank you very much for joining us for this important discussion today, and thanks also to our colleagues joining online. Apologies for the slightly delayed beginning. My name's Jeremy Wellard, and I'm the co-coordinator of the Principled Humanitarian Assistance Working Group for the Civil 7, and I also, in my day job, work for a humanitarian consortia of NGOs based in Geneva called ICFA, International Council of Voluntary Agencies. Our session today is titled Humanitarian Principles at a Crossroad, and we think it's a particularly timely discussion to have in the context of the Civil 7 and the advocacy that we as humanitarian organisations are trying to do with the G7 states in their capacity as donors and also in their capacity as extremely influential stakeholders in the geopolitical system. So today's conversation is going to bring together a panel of experts, which I'll introduce momentarily, to talk about humanitarian principles and where we see them in the world today. And as I'm sure many of you know, the world is facing extremely complex but largely preventable suffering, casualties, violence on a catastrophic scale. We heard about this yesterday in our session on the conflict in Gaza. And each year humanitarian actors are striving to do more and more with less funding, less resources and less political support to enable the space we work in. So without political resolutions, without the political will of states and other parties to conflict to end conflicts and to end the drivers of need, including climate change and other key factors, what we're left with is a humanitarian system that continues to stretch further and further. And we try to stretch the system based on an understanding of humanitarian principles and the foundation of those principles at the core of our work. But we find that the understanding and the adherence and then even the knowledge of principles is challenged more and more these days. And so our discussion today really wants to focus on, I guess, the trade-off between responding to need and then safeguarding the humanitarian principles and trying to be effective in an extremely complex and challenging world. And our panelists will really share their reflections and expertise. So I'd like to introduce the panel. Starting on my left, Mr. William Anderson, the Executive Director of SPHERE, Mr. Alradi Abdallah, Humanitarian Advocacy Advisor for the International Disability Alliance, Ms. Radia Al-Mutawakil, apologies for the pronunciation, Chairperson of Watana for Humanitarian Rights in Yemen, Mr. Kostas Moskokritis, Director General of Intersos, and lastly, Mr. Yves Ouaba, Director of Tintua Foundation in Burkina Faso. So thank you to this esteemed panel for joining us, and we're looking forward to the discussion today. And we'll kick straight off with a question regarding the overall debate on the relevance of principles, and I'll start with a question to you, William, and then to Yves as well. Over the past years, we've seen a lot of debate around the validity and relevance of humanitarian principles, especially when it comes to the principle of neutrality. So what does your network or your own position on this topic seem like, and how can you explain this to the audience? Thanks, William.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thank you to you and to Miru for being excellent guidance and coordinators of the working group, Principled Humanitarian Action Working Group with the C7, and thank you to the Sherpas as well. I want to first acknowledge just how difficult humanitarian assistance is. We are working with people often at the lowest point of their lives, people who are in shock, in grief, people who have lost so much, loved ones and homes. And we work in disorder and chaos, and we're often unwelcome as humanitarians, and we're often illegally targeted as well. So humanitarians who are sometimes on the front line are often putting their own lives on the line. So before we get into the sort of the criticisms, it's important just to acknowledge how hard humanitarian assistance actually is. Now, my role, I'm now based in Geneva, but before I was very much an operational person, and I'm struck by how difficult it is even in Geneva, because there's a lot of politics, and there's a lot of, can we say, some leadership who maybe aren't necessarily the best, and there's a lot of competition. We often are quick to criticize other humanitarian agencies, much slower to praise them. And one way we make it really difficult for ourselves as humanitarians is in the language that we use, the concepts, the terminology. So talking about neutrality, what that actually means in terms of the Red Cross, Red Crescent Code of Conduct and how it's embedded now, is that neutrality is about assistance not furthering or being tied to political or religious standpoint. So neutrality is saying humanitarian agencies don't take sides in hostilities. And there's a reason for this, which I'll come to and which you probably know already. But it also says in the Code of Conduct that it's right that agencies can have an opinion on politics, an opinion on religion. So that allows for faith-based agencies, etc. Now, too often, there's a lack of understanding between the four principles. And even at leadership level, and where there's a significant lack of understanding, we keep getting mixed up. What is neutrality, independence, and impartiality? In the language of media, for example, they would call impartiality neutrality. We really trip ourselves up. There's also a fear about these principles. Frontline aid workers, if I can use that term, frontline aid workers are frightened about talking about the compromises they necessarily have to make in neutrality and independence when carrying out their work, because they'd be worried that maybe their head office, their regional base, wouldn't understand or accept the compromise, but it's a necessary compromise in order for them to do their work. Same thing with kind of the capital office reporting back to head office. Because of this lack of understanding of the difference between the principles, there's often a fear about talking about it. I'll come to that in a minute too. So with the four humanitarian principles, I think it's right that we put humanity in impartiality, very separate to independence and neutrality. I'm already tripping over the words. So it's really important because neutrality in and of itself is not an absolute value. Desmond Tutu said, if you're neutral when there is injustice, you're actually siding on the oppressor. You're not being neutral, you're siding on the oppressor. When you're neutral when there's injustice. So it's not a good and absolute value in and of itself. It's a posture, it's an operating principle. It's a tool, to enable humanitarians to work, which is very different from humanity, which is very much an ethical and an absolute value. So I think it's really important to separate the two from the two. And independence, for example. Dante, in his great work, declared that those who are utterly independent have a special room reserved for them in hell. So independence, again, is not in and of itself a good thing. But they are operating tools, they're modus operandi to enable humanitarians to do their work. So it's really important that when we talk about neutrality, we don't say that we as individuals are taking a moral stance, we say that organizations are taking a modus operandi principled stance. So Ukraine, so Israel, Gaza, so Myanmar, North Korea, all these countries where agencies are saying that they're neutral, it's not that the individuals have taken a stance that neutrality is an absolute value, it's that the organizations have taken a stance to allow them to operate. Okay, I'll be quick now. Aid workers, yeah, so not individuals, but still necessary to be advocates for. It's still necessary to stand up and call out crimes against humanity. not necessarily judging between the either side, but calling out the effects and the impact and the outcomes of it. Okay, I'll stop there, Jeremy, and hand over.
Thanks very much, William, and we'll circle back, I'm sure, at the end to dig a bit more deeper. Yves, over to you, and coming perhaps from a slightly different perspective, leading a local organization in Burkina Faso, how do the debate around the relevance of principles pay out in your work? Thanks, Yves.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I will try to keep it in English, but I prefer to inform you that my English is not that good. I am a French speaker, but there is no translation, so I will do my best. So sorry if I use some French word during my presentation. Okay, I think the principle of neutrality doesn't get any problem on as a principle, but is the interpretation of community, government, or groups that can be the problem. In my country, when we talk about neutrality, it means that you try to find a way to justify that you are giving help to groups. And for the community, when you say we are neutral, we can assist everyone according to his vulnerability, they just ask, how can you assist those who come and kill us? And I think it's that's the challenge for humanitarian to let the community know when we're talking about neutrality doesn't mean that we want to help group, because in our humanitarian action, we didn't work with armed groups. When someone gets an arm, it didn't be part of our beneficiary or thing like that. And neutrality means for us to assist all vulnerable people where they are. If they are in the government part or if they are in the group's part, they also need to get assistance. The other problem also when we can face out in that principle is most of national NGOs in Burkina Faso was developing NGOs. And if you are developing NGOs, we work with government for sure. So when it came to switch to humanitarian, you cannot say, oh no, I forgot all I make in the past. I don't know the government. Everybody see who is the government. But you have to say, yes, I'm working with the government, but now I am humanitarian actors. And for that, even if I am Burkinabe, even if the person came to attack Burkinabe people, professionally, I have to be neutral on my work. And if I am neutral professionally, it allows me to go everywhere to assist the vulnerable people. I think it's the main discussion we have. The other thing also is now in Burkina Faso, you cannot go you're alone to give aids. You need to be on convoy. And the convoy is escorted convoy with armed person. And if you come with armed convoy and you say, oh, I am neutral, it's not sounds good. So we, as a humanitarian community, we're trying to discuss with government to just let the government know what we are doing there. When we talk about humanitarian negotiation, what is talk? Just to build the trust between humanitarian community with government, because the main problem, according to that neutrality, is the view of the government. If the government doesn't know what you are doing in the area where they are not present, they may thought you feeding groups, you giving group information, you give something to group to allow you to go there. So it's really important to clarify that with the government and ask also the government to allow us to go on the assistant without armed escort. The last point I want to put on the table also is most of international NGOs and UN agencies, it's easy for them to say we are neutral because you are not from the country. We don't have history, you don't know, there is no link with government or things like that. And it's easy to say, a national NGO, you cannot be neutral. And I'm not okay with that national NGO cannot be neutral, because in my case, my organization now has switched to humanitarian, do their best to be on the field as neutral, professionally neutral, even though at Burkina, I still love my country maybe more than others person, but to allow vulnerable person to get assistance wherever they are, I had to be professionally neutral, and I'm working on it. Thanks.
Merci beaucoup, Yves, thank you very much. Really appreciate your insights there as well, and I particularly think this piece around it's both our own understanding of principle, but also what do our interlocutors, particularly governments and authorities, understand we mean when we're talking about these principles. And really the personal connection to how this unfolds in your context is extremely important. So next we're talking about how our colleagues here are navigating the erosion of principles. And Radia, I'd like to ask you, and then Kostas, the next question. Are the humanitarian principles still effective to underpin the work of your organization? And can you share some examples of where you find it difficult to uphold principled assistance and what measures you might put in place to continue to deliver? Thank you.
Thank you. First, I want to clarify that we are a human rights NGO, not humanitarian NGO, but we share the same principles. And if you just realized, we are trying now to explain neutrality as it is a stigma. And this is because of the narrative that parties to the conflict and governments tried to pass. Actually, I might be a little bit fanatic here, because yes, I am neutral. As a local NGO, as individual, I am neutral. What does it mean to be neutral? It means that you stand beside victims, and take a space from all parties to the conflict. So the first sentence that we have been faced when we started our work in human rights, I work in Yemen. It is a conflict zone. There is like huge amount of parties to the conflict, and they were saying like you are trying to speak equally between the victims and the criminals. This is what parties to the conflict are saying usually. So two parties to the conflict, victims are not the civilians, and not the real victims. Victims is them, because they think that they are defending themselves as an armed group or a government, or they are like having the right. So we are saying that no, we are neutral. We are taking space from all parties to the conflict, defending victims and civilians according to the international humanitarian law, which doesn't care who doing what when it comes to politics, but it cares about how do parties to the conflict deal with different with civilians, to what extent they respect the international humanitarian law. So we like it was not easy to hold this principle, being independent and neutral among a war. But within the time, this very difficult principle became our protection. So it was not only because this is what we have to do, it is the kind of protection that we can get. So parties to the conflict, even if they are angry at us as a human rights NGO, even if they are doing like huge campaigns against us and detaining some of our team in the ground, behind the closed doors, they tell us, we know that you are independent and working against all parties to the conflict. And this is the only kind of protection we have in the middle of armed groups and our neighborhood is Saudi Arabia. So being neutral, independent, professional is like our protection siege. I will not say, the question said like when we have to compromise, like something like this. It didn't happen, actually. I want to say like a successful story. One of the only services we provide for victims in Yemen, it's the legal support. So we have lawyers who are following daily after the cases of detention, forced disappearance, and torture. At the beginning, when we started to talk to different groups about those who are legally detained, they were just like angry at us. And they were saying, you are talking according to the law, the international law, we are in war, it is emergency, and those people are spies. And so we started to explain, even to armed groups, our work. And we don't care if this person is innocent or not innocent, it's not our work. If you think that he or she like committed a crime, you can transfer them to prosecution and follow the legal steps. So we succeed among the wars of the years of war in Yemen to participate in releasing hundreds of detainees from all parties to the conflict. So when there is like, when you stick to the principles that gave you all the headache, within the time, these principles not will protect you, but it will help you also to help, victims. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and really appreciate actually that you bringing the this human rights defender and perspective into this mix, because we're talking about the bigger picture of people's lives, not only the pure humanitarian needs. Kostas, over to you also on the same question. How is Intersos navigating these challenges? Thanks.
First of all, I'm happy that I come last because I have just to complete what the others said, because, and I have to say that I really agree with what has been said so far. Now, I will put it, first of all, the answer to the question if principles are still effective, the answer is definitely yes. And principles are our ethical and practical guideline to navigate the context. And here I will put the point of access. Why we need the principles, why we work somewhere, it's because we need to have access, not access for our staff, not access for the drugs, but mainly access, and this is the most important, is the access of the communities in need of assistance to the services. So, and then it comes the staff that will provide the services, then it comes the drugs or whatever else. And I can tell you that working, for example, in a very nasty bidonville in Haiti some years ago, where each neighborhood was controlled by a different gang, it was not difficult to persuade them to reopen the only hospital existing in the bidonville of 250,000 people. The real problem was not the drugs. The real problem was to guarantee that from one neighborhood to the other, the ambulance could cross without the person wounded being dragged out of the ambulance and killed. So access is the issue, and the rest is supporting this access. Being a humanitarian organization, of course, compassion is our way of working, is the base of our work. And to this, and this goes together with humanity. Some years ago, you might have heard about, it was for Myanmar, calling for armed intervention in order to guarantee humanitarian assistance to population in Myanmar, as the junta, the military was not allowing international aid to come in. Perhaps even before, you might have heard the phrase, not shoot to kill, but shoot to feed. That was referring to Somalia. So, no, humanitarian action and principle is based on humanity. Then, regarding impartiality, I don't need to add anything to what has been said. It's our practical tool to have access. In terms of neutrality, and I agree with what has been said, I just want to say that neutrality doesn't mean close our eyes in front of gross violations. Neutrality means that we don't have to overestimate ourselves. We are not the judges of everybody. We are simple humanitarian workers in a context that we must know very well in order to be able. We must work with the communities together in order to identify needs, risk, and everything. And then let the judges to the International Crimes Tribunal, wherever has to do its job. Our job is to save lives, alleviate suffering, and then, of course, it's our duty, like a doctor, when a doctor sees in Italy a child brought to him in the first aid, in the emergency room, beaten, has to inform the police. If we see crimes, people tortured or whatever, we have to denounce it. This is clear. And how we do this, it's another story. It's more complicated, but it's always possible, directly or indirectly. So, examples where principles are very difficult to uphold. First of all, I go a bit back in Angola. Angola, at the end of the war, the last years of the war, we didn't have access to UNITA-held areas. And to be honest, they didn't want us in. The international community had isolated UNITA because they were considered as the ones responsible for the collapse of the peace agreement, and we didn't try hard as well. The result, when the war was over and we got access to the areas of UNITA, we found catastrophic levels of malnutrition, not only for children, but for everybody, and the mortality rates really disastrous. Then, a bit more recently, Borno State, Nigeria, we were obliged to go with the army to provide humanitarian assistance. And still now, we don't have access to the Boko Haram, now it's ISWAP, controlled areas. Then, Ukraine, we don't have access to the Russian-controlled areas. So, there are a lot of areas where we don't have, we cannot apply easily the principles, but that doesn't mean that the principles are not valid. And my last thing is our homework. As humanitarian organizations, what do we have to do? First of all, I will use the phrase, fantastic phrase that an ex-general director of ICRC had used in an interview to BBC, and I always use it. It's that we don't take no as an answer. When we discuss with the armed groups, non-state armed groups, with authorities, with whoever, and we have to negotiate with all parties of the conflict, of course, and that was not, for example, unfortunately, the case in Afghanistan before the collapse of the government and the Taliban taking power. We don't take no as an answer. We continue to negotiate. And what do we negotiate for? Access. Then we have to train our staff. We have to keep our house proper and clean. Our staff has to be trained. Our way of working has to be correct. And then, of course, we have to be extremely careful with the perception, because the perception of communities, of authorities, of armed groups is vital again and again, and I will never be tired to repeat it, to gain access for the communities in need to the services.
Great, thank you, Kostas. And again, coming back to this point on perception, you mentioned earlier, though, the necessity of ensuring access to services for all people in need. And I want to turn to Alradi to ask you a question around how do principles and how do the challenges to principled assistance impact the ability to access and to ensure access to assistance for diverse and vulnerable groups, including all populations, especially those that are hardest to reach and hardest to serve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Hello, everyone. Happy to be with you here. So let me start with a quick and real story. Somewhere there was a coordination meeting for purchasing and delivering humanitarian aid, specifically non-food items. One of the people in the meeting raised that there is a huge need to provide mobility devices, and that is being recorded. However, another one says that, well, I don't think that could be under humanitarian aid, and also considering the lack and the tight budget that we have, I'm not sure this should be a priority. I will be back to this story throughout my speech. I will focus more on persons with disabilities as an example of vulnerable group who have been impacted by not holding the humanitarian principle in providing aid. As you know, persons with disabilities face greater risk during crisis and war, and many studies highlighted the impact of disaster on persons with disabilities. For example, the mortality rate for persons with disabilities is 2 to 4 higher comparing with persons without disabilities. Keeping this in mind, I have a nice quotation that I heard from my colleague says that usually the disasters are very inclusive, however, the response is not that inclusive. What does that mean in the context of the humanitarian principle? It means that if we need to consider the principle of humanity, that means we provide support according to the need. We need to consider the need of all diverse people, not to have a standard for the need, not to have a standard for estimation about the need should be 1, 2, 3. There is a need for a specific group. There is a need for women in particular during their healthy times. There is a need for persons with disabilities that is specifically related to this group, such as mobility devices, as we saw in the story, like personal assistant, accessible communication, and so on. So we need to, one of the challenges, if we need to be really in line with the humanitarian principle, we need to consider all needs are the same, and we need to provide this need based on only need, not based on assumption or with looking at the political agenda. Another issue that I guess we all observe now, there are selectivity in providing aid to some crises and not to other crises. And that means there is a great support for some crises, which we appreciate. People are impacted there, they get good support to some extent. However, the other people or affected people in the other crises that are forgetting, I can mention my country, Sudan, in this context, is really being in a significant impact. And that significant impact means we have a small amount of budget and we need to cover huge need. Who will be cut first in the response? Marginalized groups, people who are harder to reach and easy to forget, and people that cost a lot of money if we would like to deliver a satisfactory response. As we saw in the story, the guy mentioned that we don't have enough funds. Let us cut the mobility devices. Let us go for food and so on. So that means we are denied the dignity of those who need mobility assistance. We are denied the independency of those who need mobility devices and so on. In the same line, we also observe there is a new approach of redirecting fund from crisis to others, given that there is a significant amount of persons who are in need for assistance, around 300 million in this year. That means around 50 million of them are persons with disabilities. So within this huge need for humanitarian assistance, there is also a significant cut and redirection in the financial aid to crisis. And this is always follow the political agenda, which again undermining the humanitarian principle. The same question will be, how about those should be always in a priority because their need is significant. Because if we are really based our assistance in a humanitarian need assessment, not in the political agenda, they will be at first to be served, but now are in the list, and the impact on them are even greater because they have been already neglected during the stable time before the crisis, and the crisis worsening their situation. So I guess there is a huge challenge if we need to provide really quality humanitarian assistance for all. We need to consider those are marginalized. We need to uphold the humanitarian principle. We need to consider all needs are the same. We need to apply the humanitarian principle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, and extremely well said. You've mentioned a number of times the issue of the political agenda, and in the contribution from our working group to the Civil 7 communique, we also spoke about what we see as the double standards in the application of IHL to different populations around the world. And we wanted to focus the next few questions around this particular subject because it's quite an important one. So firstly, coming back to Yves, on double standards to IHL, I mean, we see this as a major challenge today in how the different powers, and particularly the G7 members, are really continuing this double standard application. How does that affect the humanitarian sector in your view, and the ability of actors to provide principled assistance in different contexts, and particularly in Burkina Faso? Thanks, Yves.
Thank you for that good and wonderful question. I will take it in 4 points. First one will be, in my country, the humanitarian community is losing credibility. Because when people get displaced, we come and see them and say we will make a need assessment to know what you want and how much you are on your family. We come with what we take with you, and we say, as humanitarian community, we'll be back to you soon to give you assistance to help you. And when we go back, 1 month after, 3 months after, nothing happened. And displacement, we came again. Please say us, what is your need? What is your need? We'll be back. When you come the third time, the community say, okay, it's okay. We don't want you to come back or something else. We'll do all on our own. Exactly. Thanks you. So, and that is mainly due to the lack of funding. Nowadays, we can all constate that Central Sahel crisis, GRC crisis, Southern crisis is some forgotten crisis. There is no fund enough to assist the population, and is, I think, a real problem. And the G7 members should have a look on that point. How can we focus our helps and our funding also to the humanitarian principle? Because humanitarian principle is not just for humanitarian actors on the field, but as a donor, we also need to take in account that principle. The second point is, we had just finished with the second point, according to the respect of principle by the donor. The other point is, when you talk with the donor, most of the time they say, we are accountable to our taxpayers. Wonderful. But who is accountable to the affected people? I think is the main question we have to ask. As an international community, we are not also accountable to what happened in the world? I think we should ask that to all states and also the donors to also be accountable to the affected people and look how we can manage to assist them wherever they are and not according to their localization or their country or their ethnicity or their religion, cause is linked to humanitarian principle. And the last thing I want to say, when I come in Europe, I know that European majority of countries decided to build UE, United European Union. Wonderful. What is the main value when we're building UE? Is humanity. The main value is humanity. And it says on the UE text, it's the first value. And when we talk about assisting community, we say, no, first of all, you need to be democratic. Before we get our humanity, you first need to be democratic. We didn't fight against democracy. All of us, we need democracy. But when someone doesn't have something to eat, when your children cannot go to school, you have anything in your mind, the first thing you are looking is what? How to get something to eat, how to take care of your children. Your first thing is not how you can vote the president. No. You don't care who is the president. We just need to eat or to take care of your kids. And I think it is important for us as civil society to check what is democracy has to be in our country. Even we cannot make election, it doesn't mean we will throw out democracy. We have other plans of democracy where we have to work of. How women, our youth can participate to the local democracy. We can work on it. How the authority has to be accountable to the people. How they not rob public fund. We can work on it. But we cannot say you are not democracy. We get military as a president, so we stop assistance. I think it's not fair. And as Jay said, as also European Union, we should keep what our value are, humanity, and try to don't just proclaim we are humanity is a value, and otherwise our practice didn't take care of that principal value. I think it will help, and it will make easy assistance, and it will be a kind of equity for other countries in the world also. Sorry for the quality of my English, but I hope I thank you.
Thank you, Evan, and your points are really articulate and clear. It's much appreciated, in fact, that you've highlighted this grave discrepancy in the value of humanity that we are facing. Kostas, from your perspective on double standards on IHL, how do you see this playing out in the way that Intersos is working at the moment?
First of all, I would like to say that we see even triple standards. So the double standards, we can see them in, to use a simple example, a quick, easy example between Ukraine and Gaza. And I will be very quick on that so we can have time to discuss more. The discovery of a mass grave in Bucha in Ukraine has not the same, receives much more attention even from the press, from the international press, with comparing to the discovery of a mass grave in Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. And I stop here. I don't think we have to say anything more. Look at the titles how many times Bucha, and I don't reduce the violation of dignity of human beings of international humanitarian law in Bucha. No, I just want to say that it's weighted more than one in Al-Shifa hospital. When I was a bit joking with the triple standard, yes, we have the other category where the international stakeholders, they don't care at all about the violation of international humanitarian law. Besides me, Radia, she's coming from Yemen. And in Yemen, we saw a G20 now, let's say, country with arms of from a G7 country bombing school buses. What happened? Nothing. And now I come to the consequences. The consequences are dire because the violations, the blatant violations of humanitarian law, plus impunity, they set the paradigm. And the paradigm is that you can do what you want without having any consequences. And that's where we are today. And of course, it goes together with moments of global disarray, disorder that we are living now, where every single regional power, whatever, can do whatever they want with impunity. And I finish with Sudan case. We have, again, at least one G20 country fueling the conflict. Everybody knows. One country fueling the conflict in Sudan with zero at all, not only zero consequences, but with this country is even promoting itself in the international scene. Okay, so I stop it here.
Thank you, Kostas. And I think actually I need to join this question to the next question for you, Radia, because I think this whole question around double standards really comes actually back around to the question of human rights and dignity and what are we really striving for here. So how do we connect now in this extremely complex and confusing world we're trying to work in? How do we connect this idea of double standards in IHL with the same human rights basis that we're trying to use to define humanitarian principles and the work that we're doing? The right of people to access food, water, shelter, health, all other basic needs, the right of children to go to school, the right of parents to have a life with their children. Can a focus on human rights help us in the humanitarian side, develop a better argument, a better engagement with our interlocutors, including, of course, the G7 and the other stakeholders? Thank you.
Thank you. First, regarding the double standards, yesterday, the ambassador Panoli, this is how? Belloni. When she talked, she mentioned the name of only one leader when it comes to the wars, which was Putin. So I wanted by then to comment that, unfortunately, the ugly fact that we have more than one Putin in this world. In Yemen only, we have bunches of Putin. In Sudan, we have like Putins. And the most dangerous Putin now is in Israel, and his name is Netanyahu. So because this is Rome, and I felt very emotional because the Rome Statute was adopted in Rome, and now for the first time, the criminal court is even threatened publicly by Israeli leaders, which is like a new significant aggression against the human rights mechanisms. So that would bring me to human rights and my favorite subject, which is criminal accountability. So I have been listening to many humanitarian platforms this time, and they were talking about the violations they face from parties to the conflict that doesn't help them to have access, more than talking about the work that they are doing. So we are in a problem now that really humanitarian NGOs, they are now facing not only the lack of funds, but also the lack of accountability. In many cases, I'm talking about the man-made crisis, not the natural crisis. In many cases, humanitarian aid access cannot go through, not because the humanitarian aid is not there, it's because parties to the conflict will not humanitarian aid to go there. So what is needed, it's accountability, because really that the whole world is designed now in a way that enhance impunity more than accountability. And I keep saying this is not a destiny, this is a situation that can be changed, and it should be changed. There must be avenues for accountability, because parties to the conflict, they really don't care. From our documentation in Yemen, there are many preventable violations, but they are committed because parties to the conflict, they trust impunity more than anything else. And when it comes to humanitarian NGOs also, we did like a study in Yemen about the civic space, and I was surprised that humanitarian NGOs are facing violations in Yemen by parties to the conflict more than even human rights NGOs. Because the type of the work for the humanitarian NGOs, it needs a lot of coordination with parties to the conflict, but also because parties to the conflict, they feel safe around humanitarian NGOs. They know that there is no harm, and they will not talk about the violations that they are committing against humanitarian NGOs. I'm not asking humanitarian NGOs to change their policy or their attitude, because we know that they should, their main target is to have access to bring humanitarian aid. They are a lifeline for millions, but we are in a time that even humanitarian NGOs in some way have to be engaged for asking for criminal accountability to be able to do their own work. And also, even in their daily work, there should be a kind of collective pressure in parties to the conflict. In Yemen, pressure works. I don't know about other conflict zones, but in Yemen, pressure works. And I keep telling humanitarian NGOs in Yemen, local and international, raise your voice collectively, it will work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Al-Radi, does pressure work when it comes to the engagement of the human rights perspective and in terms of principled assistance in your experience?
Yeah, let us say that indeed the international law, in particular the human rights law, is soft law. As lawyers say, soft law. That means it works through a specific mechanism, including the pressure and so on. However, building on that and building on what Radia said, that we need accountability, and actually the human rights framework provide a very good accountability mechanism through the Human Rights Council, through the treaty body system, the convention, the bodies or the committees that are in place within the United Nations system in order to monitor the implementation of such human rights convention. We have what they call is the UBR process, the periodic report to the Human Rights Council. So there are global mechanisms for accountability, and also there is more tools within the human rights system for accountability. For example, there is obligation to collect desegregated data, and here desegregated data will help us to understand if our response is really like neutral and based on humanity, because it will tell us if it exactly desegregated, it will tell us how many persons with disabilities is being targeted, how many women, and so on. So we can understand if we really ending the suffering or no. Also, the human rights framework provide framework for participation and engagement of the impacted or affected population. So it could support the localization agenda, which could significantly support the implementation of humanitarian principle and so on. Beyond that, also the human rights framework provide us with interpretation on how to apply the humanitarian principle in a specific context. For example, the CEDAW will tell us how to implement the humanitarian principle in the context of women. Likewise, the CRPD or the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities will tell us how to implement the humanitarian principle in the context of persons with disabilities. For example, if we are talking about impartiality, which is equivalent to non-discrimination, the CRPD will tell us how the non-discrimination could apply in the context of persons with disabilities. If we are denial like reasonable accommodation, or if we are undermining the legal personality or the legal capacity of persons with disabilities, that will be considered as a disability-based discrimination under the human rights framework. That's mean, and we are violating also, we are understanding well the humanitarian principle. Likewise, if we are talking about ending suffering under the humanity principle, what ending suffering mean in the context of persons with disabilities? Mean assistive devices, as we talked earlier, mean providing accessible communication, accessible warning, early warning system, accessible information about evacuation, and so on. So the CRPD in particular provides us with a lot of details, a lot of guidance on how to apply those humanitarian principles, and also how to deliver overall humanitarian assistance that is in line with the human rights-based approach and meaningful and quality aid for persons with disabilities. So, and that apply for the other marginalized group. And I guess like putting together human rights and the humanitarian principle could work well, bearing in mind that the human rights framework is also applicable during the crisis time, not only during the stable or peace time. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. William, with your permission, I might open for a few questions before we come to my next question to you, because I feel actually that might be part of the summing up at the end, and I want to make sure we have a good chance for discussion with the room. So, colleagues, if there are any questions based on what we've been talking about so far, and I think some very important and interesting connections are being made between the humanitarian agenda and some of the broader rights-based agenda that the Civil 7 is dealing with. If there are any questions in the room or online, then we take a few questions now and use those to facilitate the discussion. Please, sir.
Thank you. Stefano Pizziali, General Manager in CESVI. Which is your opinion on the triple nexus, humanitarian development and peace nexus? Could it be a way to improve the cooperation among the different actors? Or do you see any risk in this kind of approach? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions in the room? We can take a few and then we can try to discuss them with the panel. Mira, please.
Thank you to all panelists. Really brilliant discussion, and thank you for all your strong points. Maybe, given that we're talking about really, we had a really good discussion around double and triple standards. How do you see us as a community, both human rights community and the humanitarian community, how can we somehow change that? I know this is a big question, and I don't know, but I wonder if you have any thoughts. How can we influence the powers to start changing that and start going back to the basics in respect to IHL and other principles?
Great, thank you. Excellent question. I don't see any other hands in the room. We have also a colleague monitoring the online chat in case there are questions coming through. No, I mean, I think there is. Oh, sorry, there's one more in the room, and then I take it. Yeah.
Sorry, no. I wanted to ask, do you think maybe we should change the communication of human rights? Because right now, especially in the West, there is a strong communication that the double standard and the triple standard especially doesn't exist. Because there is this perception that human rights are global and they're applied globally. There are charters, there are courts that apply all of these rights on a global scale. Isn't at this point just a tale? We tell to ourselves that yes, they are global, they are achieved. We don't need to fight so fiercely to apply them. While on the press, on facts, we can clearly see that this application, this global application, doesn't exist really. Should we change this false communication in a way that's preventing from more radical action? Thank you.
Great, thank you. No, excellent, an excellent set of questions. William, would you like to kick us off with a few points? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, let me come to the nexus and then leave the human rights aspect. But thank you for that question. Going back, when did humanitarian as a word or as a term, as a concept come in? Well, it's not that long ago. And before, we talked about aid, and often it was humanitarian and development, but together and not so distinguished. Now there's nuance in the terms, and I totally get that. But the word nexus itself means binding together. But I mean, not that many people know it, and it's also a confusing term. It's not easy to unpack that and understand it and then know what to do about it. And this is nuance, but let me just say a general point on how we use terms. So there was LRRD, linking relief to recovery to development. Then we had disaster mitigation preparedness, DMP. Then came DRR, disaster risk reduction. Then came resilience, and that was a big buzzword for quite a long time, but that's given way to climate change adaptation, and then came what, nexus? but what would we keep repackaging something that's in the 8th Red Cross Code of Conduct, which is striving to reduce future vulnerabilities while we're working in the present. And when we're working with people, they don't define themselves in relief, recovery, development, nexus, resilience, whatever acronym you can think of. It starts to become word soup and meaningless because we're working with people who are not in a continuum, but in a contiguum of capacity and vulnerability. And while we're working with them, we're almost doing the response, but also preparing for future vulnerability and helping to reduce that. So that's a kind of, the other one was anticipatory action. Again, it's nuanced, there's a trigger, if there's a flood and a certain amount of rainfall, but it's fundamentally the same thing. It's about working with people in the moment, but enabling them to survive and recover quickly. And often preparatory work is part of response. And response work is actually preparatory. So we keep relabeling it, and a cynic might say that that is to attract donor funding. But I think we should stop using new concepts and new terms and having big words like grand bargain that means everything but means nothing. So I think we really need to go back a little bit to basics in how we label what we do, because it would help us and it would primarily help the people that we work with.
Great. Thank you, and I think an interesting connection there to this point around the communications around the work we do, because these terminology, we start to toss them around like we all know what we're talking about, and we possibly could give 5 to 6 different definitions of nexus up here if we all tried. Yves, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. As it was saying, I think if we can really put something truly in nexus, it will help, because it is just a word, and when you are in a conference and you arrive at a point when you have no solution, you say, nexus can be the solution. But for me, nexus is not just a word, but nexus has to be a real approach. I just take the case of humanitarian. We used to make assistance to affected people, is our mandate. But how can you assist one person for 10 years? Where you find the money to do that? It's not possible. So we need to work with development partner. When we assist someone and that person recover for his disaster situation, development program can and take that person to the development. And I think it's the first connection of the nexus. He is no more with assistant pupil, he is more now in development. But when we talk about assistant development, where can you do that work if you don't have a peace place? So peace building actors need to work also in the areas where we get conflict, we get crisis, to rebuild peace and allow humanitarian workers to work to assist the person and after to make the link with development. But if we think Nexus has to make the three together at the same place, it cannot work. I think there is linking we have to make to get that Nexus happen. And the other question, according to the how we can manage the 2 or 3 different, I think the most important thing is the humanitarian principle. Is the most important, but they are not known by everyone. If everyone know the principle, agree the principle, things gonna change. Because people will say no to the government. No, you're not allowed to do that, cause of principle. But people don't know the principle. Humanitarian principle is just actually for the humanitarian community. No, it's for everyone. And our countries or state are signed the document, are signed the politics. They are obliged to respect that document. But community don't know what is inside. What is humanitarian principle is just for humanitarian. So we have to work to sensitize, even at school, parents, all the community to just know that humanitarian principle is for everyone. And if everyone respects humanitarian principle, you will get more peace, less conflict, less problem in the world. I think it can be the way to solve that. Thanks.
Thank you, Yves. Yeah, absolutely. Please, Kostas, please.
So, no, regarding the nexus, the only thing I would say that still we don't see development actors in the hotspots. Yeah. And this is not by accident, of course. Second, during the Istanbul World Humanitarian Summit, we came out with a double nexus. It was development, it was relief and development, humanitarian development. Then the peace component came in, I don't know how, which complicated even further the things. The only thing I want to say is that everybody has to do his own job, her own job. So humanitarians have to do humanitarian, and the gray zone a bit, you know, early recovery, whatever, and the development have to do, because there are different works, and there is also tension, natural tension, and Eve said it before, as a development organization, they were working with the government, and it was normal. Now go to Mopti to work as you were seen as a humanitarian, as a government agent. I stop it here, but regarding the, thanks Miro for the question, very good. I think you can try also yourself to give some answers. You are a policy advisor of Intersource, so it's your duty as well. But anyway, seriously, how we can change the things? First of all, there is a song saying, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. So for me, that's all the time what I say. We have to do our job. We have to do our job properly. We have to have our house clean and learn even more to say no. We cannot say yes to everything just to get a contract and to work. If you are working in Libya and you work and you want to work with the government's money in a camp, concentration camp, almost not concentration, sorry, in a horrible camp, detention, I wanted to say, camp in Libya for migrants, then, I mean, you lose credibility. So you must have a principled approach. It's not easy. It comes with hard choices, but if we don't match, and this is the real problem in our sector, if we don't match words and actions, then we are not entitled even to claim for the others to do the right thing. And the last thing on that is that we are products of our societies. We are not born in vacuum. So we follow the societies. If the situation is as it is now, we suffer the situation of the society or the societies where we belong. So the change, we can do our job properly, we can advocate, we can change communication, and of course we have to put the local communities, I don't say NGOs or whatever, I say the local communities in the front of the stage. And we don't not only use their words, as we said in the years ago, we have to be, the amplifier of the voice of, no, we have to bring them, their communities on the front stage. They know how to speak, and you see that they don't need our support, but they need our support in order to bring them on the front stage, on the decision tables, which they don't belong yet. They are not belong. They are not allowed yet. And then do our job plus waiting and be part as a civil society for the change towards the direction that we want, we prefer to go. But we are products of our societies. In this kind of world where we are, I don't think how tomorrow we can change our communication or whatever, and everybody will respect the international humanitarian law.
Thank you. I want to come back actually, maybe after on this point of the going gets tough and the tough gets going, because I want to link that back to the pressure point from Radia before. But maybe first, if we continue on this with Radi.
Yeah, sure. Regardless about the terminology, I see the Nexus as a good opportunity to leverage the work of different actors, and that will help us to use or to take advantage of the existing resources and not to lose them just because we have different goals. For example, let me provide a very concrete example. If you have like a cash transfer system that established within a humanitarian situation, after like the crisis is over, I guess this could be taken up by the development actors and build a social protection system based on this cash transfer system. So because the resources is already there, I don't think we need to disregard this existing system and build a new one for the social protection. However, the critical things for me is that we need to evaluate those like phases, this interaction, not to keep the wrongdoing going on if we have done something wrong at a specific stage. For example, if our cash transfer system were not inclusive, forgetting some people, the design itself is not accessible, I guess we need to evaluate that before going on with the same mistake, with the same inaccessibility and so on. So having this evaluation phase and integrated in the process could help in benefit from the existing resources, building and leveraging from the work of each other, but with keeping the system like correcting itself and being more inclusive to all people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've talked quite a bit about Nexus, and good to hear some positive and some contrasting views there as well. I want to come back to this point around pressure, and maybe positive pressure, or you know, when what we only talk about in the humanitarian system is the conditionality of assistance. You know, and donors, but not necessarily only donors, placing conditions on the assistance that we can and should provide. And a few of us sat up last night over a very nice bowl of pasta and debated this at some length. So Radia, I really wanted to ask your opinion on this from this idea of applying pressure and linking to the human rights agenda. I mean, is there ever a point when we should start to apply conditions on humanitarian assistance based on the human rights records of different actors? And you know, how do you view that from your perspective? You know, which may be slightly different to others in the group, and I'd be interested to hear any other opinions also. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I want to just emphasize that I agree that everyone should do its own work. Humanitarian is different than development, is different than human rights, right? But they can work together in one thing, which is accountability. I'm a very good advocator, and I'm advocating for accountability because it's like affecting the whole work. And when it comes to human rights and accountability, it's whether to be very independent and professional, or it will have no impact. Sanctions doesn't have impact because it's not independent. Designations doesn't have impacts because it's not independent. I realized from a conflict zone that is very complicated that any independent work can have impact even on armed groups, not only on states. So it's like, I came because also Miro, he said, what should we do? I take this to the human rights angle and accountability, and also how to convince the West that there is like a problem. I came from what is known as the worst humanitarian man-made crisis in the world, which is Yemen. In spite of this, I'm telling you that what's happening in Gaza is different. I've never seen this in Yemen, and I've never seen this any other place, and it is very visible. It's dangerous because it's very visible. No one can deny it. It's happening in front of our eyes. So Gaza can be the lab for all of us. It's the lab for the whole international community, for the whole people around, just to experience how, to what extent we will succeed when it comes to humanitarian aid, how much it will succeed when it comes to accountability, and like all the talk about, yesterday we were talking about sustainable peace and justice. Do you really believe that there is peace, sustainable peace and justice without accountability? It never happens. It never happened, and it will never happens. So if we really want justice and sustainable peace, then accountability here means criminal accountability. Because I know humanitarians, they like understand accountability in a different, no, I mean criminal accountability, to hold those perpetrators accountable. This is like, don't start, it's like 75 conflict zones we have now. We can start with Gaza. And Gaza is a chance because the Palestinian government signed the Rome Statute, which is very rare in conflict zones. In Yemen, many parties to the conflict are involved, many countries are involved in the war in Yemen. None of them signed the Rome Statute. But in Palestine, in Gaza, it's different, that we can hold perpetrators, whether from both sides, it doesn't matter. It's just like, if this process of human rights succeed in Gaza, it will succeed everywhere. If it was failed in Gaza, I will be scared, because parties to the conflict, they learn from each other, and it's gonna be like a green light for all parties to the conflict around the world to do more crimes, and they trust impunity. So Gaza can be the step. Even if I'm from Yemen, I'm telling you that Gaza can be the first step. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And I can only say that so many of us from so many angles looking at these issues are really concerned at the moment. So this is a very pressing issue. Arari, please.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so about the conditionality, I guess we have two different issues we need to consider, like providing conditions to the budget or to the fund to organization, and also to provide the assistance to individuals. So I will focus on the second one, like if the assistance for individuals should be conditioned or not. Because many cases, if there is like assistance is conditioned, for example, by sending students to schools or like providing public work or whatever. I guess despite the good intention behind it, that they would like to work on increasing the capacity of the community and different issues and so on. From the human rights perspective, there are some challenges around this issue. First of all, I guess we need to respect the freedom and the right to choose for individuals so they can decide what they would like to do in their life. Being in a vulnerable situation that they need assistance should not be a reason for them to be denied their right to choose. And secondly, many times, those conditions are not really feasible to many individuals in the society. For example, if you are putting like cash transfer condition for children to be in the school, and you don't have inclusive education, how for me I can get a fund if I have a children with disability who cannot go to school? So that means simply I'm denying this family or household to get the condition because to get the fund, because they cannot meet the condition. How the household headed by women could be given a condition to public work, so the women could not like stay with the children or go to the public work and so on. And many examples can come up. So I guess if we are really working on like ending suffering or reducing or respond to the suffering, we need to provide the assistance without any condition, and we need to respect the dignity and the right to choose and the autonomy of those who are recipients of aid or assistance, because they don't choose themselves to be in this situation, but they have been in this situation due to the external factors, and that should not be a reason for them to be denied their autonomy. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Just a quick check in case there's any last questions from the floor. We're moving towards the final few minutes. Otherwise, we can come back to the panel. Great. Yes. Please, Rose.
Thank you. Yeah, so I just continuing on this accountability topic and thinking about double standards and the role of the G7 countries and the closing of civil society space. I'm just kind of struck sometimes thinking about how environmental organizations at some point kind of made the shift in a very deliberate way toward more disruptive activism in order to obtain political outcomes in service of, forwarding our climate goals. And I'm just wondering how the panel would view this type of activity in light of the humanitarian principles and sort of the operational role that we have as humanitarians, and then the work of civil society in our G7 countries.
Thank you. A great question in a way. I mean, what has happened to humanitarian activism? Would anyone on the panel like to take a first attempt at answering this one?
I mean, we can try. I can try. I'm not the best to answer, but indeed, the word activism, the term activism was used more in the past than now. And it's true that organizations have grown bigger, more bureaucratic, and more risk averse. they have more to lose today than, let's say, 15 years ago, when the humanitarian budget globally was 1/3 of what it is today. But there have been moments of activism, for sure. I remember a lot the access to antiretrovirals for where a lot of organizations work together with the civil society in order to put down the prices against the patents for the drugs, not only for antiretrovirals. There is a history of activism in the humanitarian world, always together with civil societies for certain causes. And I think it is also for migration as well. And I think it is important that we put it again on the table. Be careful only because, especially in Italy, everything is mixed with politics and the rest. We are talking about activism for certain causes. We are not talking about doing political campaigns. And we have to be very, very clear on that. Otherwise, we lose our moral standing. This is one question, one answer, possible answer. We need to be more activist than we are now, and indeed organizations have to think less their structure and more the impact of their work. We work more for administrative, when you are funded by institutional donors, you work more for administration than for real hands-on work in the field. Regarding conditionality also, which is something very dear to me that I wanted, it's not me, that I wanted to mention. Okay. Regarding conditionality and human rights, one thing only is that if
Activism is being...
let's ignore it. Regarding conditionality, if we put human rights in the assessment list we do before starting a mission or a project, in our countries, I tell you, they are not champions of human rights. So I don't think where are we going to work. I don't speak about Afghanistan now because Afghanistan became the spearhead of the issue, and we have discussed a lot about that. But really, if let's see where we work, and then this is something that we cannot definitely put as a... But there is another conditionality that is coming up, which is conditionality by donors to countries in order to receive. And I'm talking about countries which are especially the go between the migration routes. So action against migration movements towards Europe, disguised by the term fight against illegal traffickers, is becoming a condition to get development aid now, I speak mainly. So there is a reverse conditionality that we have to be very careful, and it's the same bad as condition nutrition activities in Afghanistan to human rights.
Thank you very much. We're in the last 5 minutes, so we're going to come to the big question, which my dear colleague Miro has already alluded to. What do we need to do to put the principles back on track? And so, William, as I said before, I would come back to you for the last question, because also I think you might help us wrap up, and then I can quickly ask the panel for any reflections on your interventions around how can we together work to reassert and revive humanitarian principles at the core of our work. Thank you.
Sure, and if the buffet runs out, Miro said he'll take us all out for lunch, so that's okay. We keep saying we're not fit for purpose as humanitarians, and Kostas is absolutely right, we need to get our house in order. But we also need to bear in mind that we're working in disorder, in chaos, and that we are not the primary bearers. We're not primary responsibility for people. It's actually the state or the de facto authority who has the primary responsibility. And who is not fit for purpose? Well, it's unaccountable governments. It's unaccountable de facto authorities. And who is not fit for purpose? It's a Security Council. When the international humanitarian law says that you need to the discrimination, you need to discriminate between a military and a civil. You need to be proportional about what you do. You need to issue precautions, and you need to ensure there's no unnecessary suffering. That's to belligerence. And Gaza, I think, is why we're saying we're at a crossroads, because it's so extreme. And who's not fit for purpose to stop this? Well, it's the Security Council, and it's the G7 governments who could bring a lot more pressure on Netanyahu. So they are even more unfit for purpose. But I'm worried that in 10 years' time, we're going to look back and think, actually, it was quite easy to be a humanitarian back in 2024, because I'm worried about conflict, increasing conflict. I'm worried about the lack of the increasing impunity, about belligerents and perpetrators of crimes against humanity, war crimes, which are happening right now, are getting away with it. I'm worried about the environment, and we still haven't come to agreement on what we do as humanitarians with the environment. That's the quadruple nexus, Costas, yeah, adding environment to peace. But we're sleepwalking towards catastrophe, and we're not doing nearly enough. And then on quality, I'm here with Sphere. We have a set of standards. They're a helpful guide. They're not by any means a rule book, but we talk about minimum standards. And we talk about minimum standards in humanitarian assistance. And it's really like an Atticus Finch moment. How would we like to be treated? What would we need for basic needs to meet a life with dignity? And we keep hearing now, let's just give up on quality in humanitarian assistance. It doesn't matter, we'll just do what we can. But I'm saying if we give up on quality or the intent, in Gaza there can be no quality at the moment, but if we give up on the intent to provide quality at some point in the future, we're giving up on the idea that there should be dignity at the heart of humanity. So to sum up, I see the humanitarian principles like a compass. And then the standards are like a map. So we have to go round a minefield, we have to go round a mountain, etc. But then everything comes down to context. And so you have to contextualize the standards based on the compass and the map to get there. Back to you, Jeremy. Thank you.
Thank you, William, and very well said. I think, colleagues, is there any last word from anyone on the panel? I don't want to keep people from lunch, and also the important discussion we can have afterwards. In principle, it will be lunch. Look, thank you all. I really appreciate the time this morning. Thanks for the engaged audience participation and colleagues online as well. We hope this has been an interesting insight into the world we are engaging in. Also to acknowledge my colleague Miro, who has helped to co-lead this working group, and really appreciate all of you participating, and we look forward to further good discussions and taking forward these big questions as we go.
Thanks to you.
Merci, bon appétit.